All right, y'all, buckle up. This is going to be a wild ride. What I'm about to tell you is, as far as I know, completely true. This happened to me as well as to some of my coworkers. Because of that, I want to have a disclaimer at the beginning of this video that I'm not going to be using anybody's real names except for my own. And while the reasons for that disclaimer are going to become pretty clear later on in this video, you can go find any and all of these people's names pretty easily. It's public information. Some of the people involved in this video are even actively putting their names out there, including the main person this video is about. I also am not using this one particular person's name because I feel like there's a lot of stuff going on that maybe even this person is not aware of or hasn't come to terms with, and I don't want to be responsible for a lot of negativity going towards this person, who is, at the end of the day, an old man trying his best, albeit his best is really creepy and walking up to a school full of young kids and just knocking on the door and hoping someone's going to talk to him about his crazy theories. Not too long ago, I was sitting in my teacher's lounge talking with the people in there. My vice principal mentioned that a couple days before, an old man had knocked on the door and asked for her by name. When she was nowhere to be found, he left a thumb drive for her and said, please get this to her. It's very important that she sees this information. So the thumb drive does get to her and she's rightfully confused. Like, what is on this thing? Am I supposed to just plug a random USB drive into my computer? The right answer here is no. You are not supposed to just plug random USB drives into your computer. Did she do it? Yup. Did I do it? Yup.
You can't fix stupid.
Even though she knows she shouldn't plug this in because it's a random USB drive, she's really curious how this guy knew her name. So she plugs it in and sees one single folder, which is titled The State of the Peace, Love, and Progress Party. She doesn't go any further, she yanks it right out, doesn't click on anything, and as far as I know, her computer has been perfectly fine since then. Like I said, I later plugged this USB drive into one of my devices, and my computer has been fine. And that's something I kind of want to get out of the way at the beginning here is I don't think that this man, creepy though he may have been in approaching a random building full of small children, hoping to find an adult to talk to about a mysterious thumb drive, was intending to do anything nefarious. I genuinely think he was trying to do what he believed was the best and proper course of action, given the amount of information that he had in his mind. So once I hear that there's a file called The State of the Peace, Love, and Progress Party on this USB drive that was given to her by some crazy old man, I had to have it. There's a lot of things I enjoy in this life, and dealing with a good crazy person once in a while is one of the highlights that I live for. She gives me this USB drive, but I don't really have anything to plug it into. I'm not going to plug it into a school computer. That sounds like a stupid idea. So I'm going to plug it in when I get home. But that was several hours from then, and I had this thirst for information in my mind that had yet to be quenched. So any chance that I had for free time, whether it was my prep, my lunch, whatever, I was looking up the Peace, Love, and Progress Party and trying to find out who this guy is and how he knew to ask for her by name. I was able to find the Peace, Love, and Progress Party's website very easily, as well as the LinkedIn profile for the person who I assume is the sole founder and member of the Peace, Love, and Progress Party. What follows are a series of points that I found on these websites in the order I found them and the thoughts I had as I found them. First thing I saw was that society needs to improve by fostering a culture of love and understanding. All right, a little hippy-dippy. No problems there. Second, we need to achieve world peace by eradicating homophobia, all hate, and only then can we create the perfect society and get rid of all social classes. Okay, so he's a communist. No biggie, I know plenty of communists. Number 3, the class struggle is not rich versus poor, but is closeted gay men who have yet to accept the idea that they are indeed gay and are just repressing these homosexual feelings versus everybody else. No, I am not joking. He calls them latent homosexuals and believes there is a shadow government filled with these latent homosexuals who are going on crusades because they can't accept the fact that they are indeed gay men. And not only that, but all of this is tied to our, quote, Neolithic psychology, which we have been fighting against since we were cavemen, because the caveman couldn't accept that he was gay, and then started a secret society, which then started a secret police who controls everything and suppresses the truth. When I saw point number 3, my thought was,
boy, that escalated quickly.
Point number 4. The founder of this party, who turned out to be the very same man who knocked on the front door of our school, is running for president in 2024. Sounds like Kanye West's got some competition now. On his website, I also found a lot of literature that this man has written, which it turns out is all was on the USB drive as far as I could tell. A bunch of Word docs and PDFs of these texts about the teachings of the Peace, Love, and Progress Party and this man's own personal life. So I naturally continue to dig and look at some of these texts and see what exactly it is this guy believes and why he might be showing up to a school building, again, filled with children without announcing himself or anything. I also found his LinkedIn profile, as I mentioned earlier, which has a lot of these texts or refers back to a lot of these texts in various articles or blog posts that he's made that are, 300 words long or so. They're not very big. As I continued to dig into these texts and into the short articles he had posted on his LinkedIn, I found a number of different topics that this man has written about, ranging from Trump being a neo-Nazi fascist to COVID-19 being a conspiracy theory which the latent homosexual cabal's secret police has been enforcing as a way of misinformation and suppressing humanity. In one of these articles I read, he claimed to be the world's best social scientist and that he has the best degree you can possibly earn. Not from any Ivy League school, he specifies, but from the best university of psychology one can ever go to, spending 30 years as a New York City cab driver. And I should point out, this is one of the points of confusion I had because based on the other information that he has published, I'm not sure that he actually spent 30 years as a New York City cab driver. The timelines, in my mind at least, as he has laid them out in the articles and texts that he has written, does not seem to line up for me. But I will admit, I am not him, and I haven't read all of it word for word, nor am I planning to, so I very easily could be wrong here. Now again, while skimming this material, I saw a lot of references to George Orwell. In fact, there were so many references to George Orwell that when he starts mentioning another person named George, I thought he meant George Orwell. But nope, it was something else, and I'm going to get to that in just a minute. George Orwell, of course, is famous for writing books like Animal Farm, which criticized communism and this social uprising, as well as 1984, in which there was a society where people were controlled and information was greatly suppressed, and because of that, people just kinda went along with everything because they didn't know any better. He was, of course, claiming that we are living in an Orwellian society, which, I mean, to some degree, I kind of agree with. Like, there's a lot of things that George Orwell wrote about that we are definitely experiencing. However, I do not think that we are living in a dystopia. This man does. Now again, he cites George Orwell so much that when he starts talking about another person named George, I thought he was talking about George Orwell. In fact, I thought he was doing this kind of Platonic sort of writing system where Plato would write about conversations he had with Socrates, even though Socrates wasn't actually physically there to have these conversations with him. Sort of like talking to himself in literature, but using someone he looked up to as like the other part of the conversation. I thought that's what this man was doing with George Orwell. Nope, not even close. In one of these short articles, he referred back to one of his own longer form books that he published, which is called, and I'm not joking here, Just Say No to Latent Homosexual Crusades. In this article and the book, Just Say No to Latent Homosexual Crusades, he admits that none of these ideas he has are actually his own, but that they were given to him by an invisible alien named George, who only he can talk to. And I wish I was joking about that, but I'm not. As far as I can tell in his publications, he's being dead serious about having an actual invisible alien named George who is telling him all the ways that he can fix the world. At that point, I took a screenshot of the part of the article where he says everything he knows is given to him by an invisible alien named George, and I sent that to my vice principal with a caption that read, "Hey, I think I know how this guy found out your name." But at this point, I still didn't know that this is the same man who knocked on the door. I had just narrowed it down to the person knocking on the door was either a crazy old man who believes an alien talks to him, or the follower of a crazy old man who believes that aliens talk to him. Neither of which are people you want knocking on the front door of a middle school, I should say. So what I did is I found the teacher at the school who this old man had talked to and showed her the picture of the LinkedIn profile. And sure enough, it was the same man. At that point, my vice principal gave me a challenge. If I could find out how this man knew her name, she would get me hot chocolate from Starbucks the next day. Spoiler alert, I got the hot chocolate. Now, I wanted to call him, but I couldn't find a phone number, so I ended up having to send him an email and wait. But in the process of looking for a number to call, I found out way more information. Turns out this guy has a Twitter account. He follows 5 people and has 1 follower. The 5 people he followed included 2 people who had the same last name as him. I'm assuming they're related somehow, as well as a lawyer from New York City who, I guess, kinda helps prove that maybe he was a cab driver there for 30 years. There was some 4th random person I couldn't see any connection to, but the 5th person was Samuel L. Jackson. This man made a Twitter account to follow, I presume, 4 friends and family members and Samuel freaking Jackson. Can't blame him. Sam Jackson's got a hot Twitter. His single follower was someone who has their Twitter name as gay bitch, and their handle was at sexgod420.
Nice.
And then I remembered George. I wanted to know more about George. Who was George? Where did he come from? Has he seen George, or is George invisible to everybody? I wanted to know as much as I could about this man's relationship to George. So I go to his website and I pull up that book, Just Say No to Latent Homosexual Crusades, and this is where it got sad. This is why I'm intentionally not using his name, because this man clearly went through some terrible childhood traumas with the divorce of his parents, and it really seems to have messed him up to the point where he appears to have dissociated and hallucinated the voice or presence of an invisible alien named George. And you know what? My parents are not divorced, so I cannot personally speak to the kind of trauma that a child can go through. I know a lot of the students that I teach come from divorced homes. I have friends who have gotten divorced, and I can't think of a single situation where it has turned out to be a positive situation for the kid. Add to that the fact that he lived in the middle of nowhere, Indiana in the 1950s with what appears to be an abusive father leading up to this divorce, and I can only assume that it was really tough on him. Apparently when he was 13, he got tired of all the terrible stuff going on inside his house, walked outside, looked up to the sky, and just asked the ether, whether it was God or spirits or just the sky, if there was anywhere inside or outside of his universe where there was a civilized society. And he believes at that point George answered him. When George answered him, he told him the following things. First, he was invisible, and he was going to stay invisible because we wouldn't like how he looked. Second, he named himself George, not after George Orwell, but after George Washington, our first president. Which, to a 13-year-old going through some terrible trauma, I could see how that wouldn't be a red flag. But, you know, the guy's had several decades since then to see that it is indeed a red flag. That an alien, who you will never see, named himself after the first president of the United States of America. This invisible alien named George had also apparently helped Abraham Lincoln free the slaves. But he didn't help Washington, which was obvious because Washington made a lot of military blunders that he wouldn't have made if George was indeed helping President Washington. Also here insinuating that Lincoln did not make a ton of military blunders, which anyone who has studied the Civil War will tell you is not the case. George then told the 13-year-old boy that he couldn't tell anybody about George because people would think he's crazy. No dip! He also claimed that George helped him pass the multi-state bar exam, even though he didn't know any of the information himself, by guiding his pen as he took the test. Which I should remind us, even though he apparently passed the multi-state bar exam, he was not a practicing lawyer, he was a cab driver. So what's the point in even taking the multi-state bar exam if you're not going to go into law? And even then, what's the point of having passed the multi-state bar exam and then actively choosing to instead become a cab driver? I mean, even if you don't go into law, that bar exam is a pretty big resume patter that you can use to get into a lot of different careers, my guy, and you instead apparently chose cab driving? Soon after that, I received actually a response to him in my email in which I said, hey, I just want to know what's on this USB drive before I plug it in. I also want to know how you knew to ask for my vice principal's name. He just knocked on the door and said, hey, is there someone here who's in charge? And the security officer said, yeah, you should talk to this person. So then he waited. Later on, this second teacher came and talked to him. He said, hey, I'm looking for this person. And she was like, how do you just randomly know the vice principal's name? Who are you? And that's where all the mystery came from. I have since plugged in the USB drive. I did make a copy of its contents, and I can't see that anything has gone wrong, but you know what? For all I know, George and this guy have my social security number now, and I just gotta hope that it's gonna be okay. Anyway, that is how I joined the Peace, Love, and Progress Party. I'll tell them, George. Remember to like and subscribe.